principles, you'll never get hung up on any of the regs. Okay? So the first thing you need to know about the regs is the authority for the regulations, enforcement, offenses, and penalties. It all comes under the Radio Communication Act. And the Radio Communication Act covers all radio services in Canada. It covers everything. And it's the document that gives the minister the authority to manage the radio frequency spectrum and to impose penalties and so on and so forth. So everything goes back to the Radio Communication Act. So if a person gets charged under the Radio Communication regulations, they're being charged under the Radio Communication Act of Canada. And Industry Canada, which is now, I got to change that now, because we have that name that I don't like. I don't remember what is it. Innovation. No, I can't think of it right now. Industry, innovation, science, and economic development, which has nothing to do with what I do. But anyway, they still have to keep spectrum management. But anyway, okay, so let's just say I said, or because I said so, yeah, right, okay. I said, ISED. So ISED is responsible for the administration of the Radio Communication Act. So the minister has delegated that authority to ISED. And they administer the radio frequency spectrum on behalf of the minister. So all Canadian radio services are defined and regulated within the Radio Communication Regulations. So the Radio Communication Regulations is an extension of the Radio Communication Act, where the Act gives the authority. The regulations are what the minister is going to use to administer the spectrum. They're the rules. And the Radio Communication Regulations applies to all radio communications. So anything that's in there, there's general regs that cover all systems, including amateur radio. But because amateur radio is quite unique, there's actually a section that applies only to amateur radio to cover the special limitations and the privileges that are above those other services. And that's the, I believe it's section 42. And we'll look at it in a bit here. So that's the question that's going to be on the exam. They're going to want to know where's the authority, where does the minister get his authority to regulate spectrum? It's the Radio Communication Act. Where will you find the rules and regulations for the governing the operation of amateur? The amateur is going to be the Radio Communication Regulations, not the Radio Communication Act, because there's no regulations in the Radio Communication Act, just penalties and powers of the minister. And another question they might give you is which two documents control and regulate the amateur radio service? Radio Communication Act, Radio Communication Regulations. Also be aware that they might throw in a little red herring, because the department has a third document which is incorporated clearly within the Radio Communication Regulations by what they call incorporation. It's called RBR 4. And it's a regulation by reference number 4. And it actually contains some addendums to policy specifically for the amateur radio. So that might show up. But if they ask for 2, that's it. If they ask for 3, well, that's the third one, RBR 4. Okay, so some of the golden rules. No matter what, amateurs may not transmit out of band. They may not communicate with stations outside of the amateur service. So if you get any question, can they talk to taxis? Can they do this? Can they do that? No. Cannot talk to anyone that's not in the amateur radio service.
Not even if they hear a distress call?
Different story. We'll talk about that. It's coming.
All right.
Okay. All transmissions must be identified with the call sign associated with the station. Canadian amateur stations must identify at the beginning and end of a communication and at 30-minute intervals during the communication. False or deceptive signals are not permitted, period. With the period in there? Good. I should have made it bigger. There is no age or nationality requirement for the issuance of a Canadian amateur radio certificate. Anyone can get one if they write the test and pass it. Doesn't matter if they're visiting from Amel Kiwan. If they want to do it, they can do it. They can have a certificate. It's good for life. That's not enough to get on the air. They'll need a call sign. They can only get a call sign if they have a residence.
I thought you had to have I thought you had to have an address.
As I said, a residence.
Oh, you just said
You've
that?
got to have, yeah.
I'm sorry, that was.
Yeah. Okay. Restricted operator certificates, I get this question all the time, are not considered equivalent to an amateur certificate. So your radio operator certificate for aeronautical or marine, they are not considered equivalent.
So those aeronautical, marine, and would
They're
it be
for the-
land mobile?
Land, there's still a land mobile certificate. They don't make it anymore, but there's some people that got
those
them.
are restricted certificates.
They're all restricted, and
Okay.
they're not equivalent to amateur.
Okay.
There are a few certificates that are equivalent, and if you present those certificates at the desk, we will hand you a certificate or an advanced certificate, depending on what it is.
Okay.
Those certificates are no longer issued as well, but if you were able to pass those, we'll give you the certificate. Because both getting those two certificates are more difficult than getting an advanced amateur.
That makes sense because the lady I'm seeing right now, she's a pilot, and she indicated that she has some sort of radio certification, and she said, "Oh, it was a breeze. I just took the test, and
That's
I
an
barely had to
ROCA.
study." And
Yeah, that's
yeah.
nothing. Yeah. No, if she's got an RGMC, that's different. Radio Operator's General Certificate.
Okay.
That's different. They have to know Morse code. They have to know how to take a radio apart, put it back together, do all kinds of things.
I'm sure
Yeah,
that's
so
the
they can
case.
definitely do an advanced, no problem. Anyway, continuing on. The authority to operate a Canadian amateur radio station is granted by means of the operator's certificate. That will be on the test. They're always looking to catch on that one. There are no radio amateur licenses. There are no station licenses. There's only an operating certificate. You may not install, repair, or maintain amateur radio transmitters for anyone not holding an amateur certificate. Period. Amateur radio stations may only be operated by or under the control of an amateur radio operator. Now that means the operator has to be ready to take over control, know what's going on in the station. Anyone can operate it while he's around. Doesn't mean that he's across the street or downstairs playing cards with the boys. It means that he's there, he's tracking what's going on. We've had this argument with lots of people. Sorry, but no cigar. All equipment must be operated within the rules and regulations and standards of the amateur radio service. Secret codes, ciphers, or protocols may never be used. Only protocols, modes that are considered to be public domain are permitted, which means they're public. Anyone can get a hold of them.
Like, example?
Morse code.
P25, Morse code, any of the open digital formats that are available, you can use. But you can't use encryption or anything like that. Okay.
17.
17. Transmissions intended for the reception by the general public are not prohibited. Sorry. What that means, no broadcasting. Which
So
means
you can't make yourself a radio station.
no, not on the amateur bands. No. It's not a broadcast service. Transmissions in support of business, commercially recorded material, or music are prohibited. No playing your favorite tunes for hours and hours. That's broadcasting again. It's not allowed. No advertising your business or making phone calls through phone patches to further business. Can't do that. Okay? There are services for that, and it's not the amateur radio. And there are fees and licenses for that. And transmissions may only include information of a personal or technical nature. The station operator or certificate holder is responsible for the operation of the station. Anything that happens, your call sign is issued to you. You're the one that's responsible for what's going on. Now, there's primary and secondary users on some bands. And that means that in some bands we're a primary user, there's no one else on it, and we have preference over everyone else that's on it. And some bands we're secondary. where there are other services, and if those services are encountered, we have to back off. So secondary users may not interfere with, nor will they be protected from interference from primary users. That's what that means. Radio amateur equipment requires no approval or certification for use in Canada. That may be on the test as well. You can use any piece of equipment that's been commercially designed to operate on amateur radio frequencies. It can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to go through approval process. You're responsible to make sure it stays in where you're supposed to use it, and that it doesn't send out spurs and so on and so forth. That's your problem.
And that kind of comes into play with the fact that an advanced certificate holder could create or
Correct.
build their own transmitter,
That's right. Or modify another one.
and that wouldn't be approved or certified.
Wouldn't have to be approved.
Because
But the amateur has the privilege of being able to do it. But he's still got the same rules that you've got as a basic operator.
Yeah.
It can't interfere, it can't go out of band, it can't put out spurs.
But did you say it has to be approved?
Doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to.
There are
You
no
could build
approvals.
it, and you don't have to.
Nope,
have
no
to get
approval
it
required.
No, it's just a-
Yep.
okay.
However, radio equipment used in other radio services requires approval and certification. Amateur radio stations may operate at any location within Canada. And that is entirely true. Any type, anywhere in Canada. All amateur radio frequencies are shared on a first come, first served basis. And interference to communications is called harmful interference. So if you interfere with someone's communication, that's harmful. It's stopping you from being able to communicate. Just watch that you don't hit the controls underneath there. That might not be a good place to sit. Try one over there, maybe. Okay, the content of amateur radio communications may be divulged, but the transmissions of other services may not be. So amateur communications are open. There's no expectation of privacy. But if you hear a transmission from another radio service that also has authority to use that frequency band, and you divulge that to somebody and something happens because of it, you'll be held responsible. If they can prove it. No fees may be charged with regard to operating of an amateur radio station. And stations may only communicate in a known language. No Klingon.
That's a known language.
Yeah. All stations must have a reliable means of determining the operating frequency of the transmitter. This is a biggie.
That last one there actually raises the question of what constitutes a known language.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, what does constitute a known language? If I make up a language and share it with 5 other people, they all know it. It's
No, it has to be public domain
well, I suppose so.
and wide use.
Well, I mean, there are official languages that don't have wide use.
Well, you got to understand that there's the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And whenever a conflict comes into this, the lawyers get involved with the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law is to prevent people from speaking in a language that everybody off the street could understand right away, yes or not. And that Klingon wouldn't be it.
there you go, lawyer.
Okay.
I suppose it just goes back and falls under the no encryption thing. Eh?
Exactly. Yes. So this is also important and will be on the test. The modulation of a radio telephony transmission may not exceed 100%. And a radio telephony communication is voice.
And radio telegraphy.
No, that's radio telephony.
Okay, but phony is voice,
Yeah, phony.
and
Yeah.
telegraphy is
CW,
okay.
Morse code, continuous wave. This other stuff could be FM or AM.
I just wanted to differentiate the two in my mind.
Mhm. Yeah, that's why I stopped there. Canada has no third-party restrictions. Third-party restrictions meaning that some countries will not allow you to contact a person and give a message on behalf of someone else that's not in your station. It's called third-party traffic. We don't have any. There are countries that have notified the ITU that they are against it. And if you're aware when you're talking to someone that they aren't allowed to do it and they ask you to do it, you shouldn't do it because they're going to get in a lot of trouble for it and your name will come up as well and who knows what will happen there.
How would you know that, Alan?
Because there's a list on the ITU website. They all know, they have to officially notify the ITU and there's a list for that on the ITU website. And I mentioned here again, third-party communications are prohibited by some countries. The ITU maintains a list. Canadian call signs begin with VA, VE, VO, and VY. That will be on the test. Okay, know those. Radio control of models is permitted on amateur frequencies above 30 megahertz. So basically above HF. You can do radio controlled mobiles or models. You cannot do it on HF radio frequencies. That's very clear stated. And they may try and ask you that one too.
Well, that it would only make sense because if HF is a worldwide communication.
There you go. See, there's logic to the rules.
Yeah.
For frequencies below 30 megahertz, the frequency stability of the transmitter must be comparable to that of a crystal. This is because in the early years, frequencies tended to drift a lot, and they found the crystal to be the most reliable. So they look at how accurate a crystal is, and if you can approximate it without the use of a crystal in the new electronics age, fine, but you have to be as good as a crystal. So your phase lock loops are as good or better than. And they also, they do utilize a crystal somewhere as a reference. Stations must comply with the regulations of the International Telecommunications Union. This is where the pinch comes in, as I was mentioning earlier. Your name comes up as forwarding third-party traffic. You're not following the ITU regulations. So best not. The antenna installations are governed, here it is, governed by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. I did change that one. Okay. Which used to be Industry Canada, but it's still called Spectrum Management. So there we go. And it refers to a document. And you should have a look at that, particularly the exemption. You want to put something in that's exempt if you can. And that gets into a whole complex thing, which I'm not going to cover here. That document could take a couple of days to walk through for specific instances. The document MCAB2, that might be on the exam, deals with the resolution of RF interference to radio sensitive devices. You remember I was talking about radio frequency interference? The department comes in and does a recommendation. That's the document they go by. They look at the field strengths in the house that's affected. There's a certain level, their fault, another level, your fault. RF exposure limits are set by Health Canada document Safety Code 6. The department does not set those. That's done by Health Canada, but they go by them. They require compliance to them. In order to hold a Canadian amateur radio call sign, you must maintain a valid Canadian residential address. There's your answer there. And that's for anybody. Now, emergencies, exemptions, when the rules may be broken. For the immediate protection of life or property, be prepared to justify the decision to do so. You will be grilled over it. In the initiation or response to distress communications, and you'll notice in nice bold printing, underlined, which appear to be unheard by other stations. So you're not the first one to jump in. The person is sending an SOS. It's not an amateur station. Wait a couple minutes, no response, then you get in, if you can. And then immediately, you do everything you can to get the right person with the right privileges and so on to be talking to this person. And you give it over once you've done that, and you're done. Nobody will have a problem with that. It's done that way. They will have a problem if you jump in before Coast Guard or something like that. And that's another story. Okay, bandwidths. See, the department doesn't have any restrictions on modes. It doesn't say you have to use this mode or you can't use that mode, this mode. Everything that they do is either on what the bandwidth itself will support, or the maximum amount of bandwidth you can use within certain frequency ranges. That's as far as they go. So generally for continuous wave, it's 1 kilohertz, CW. That's the maximum bandwidth. If you're using CW, you should not exceed 1 kilohertz. For sideband, it shouldn't exceed 2.8 kilohertz. But it can, because depending on the frequency range, if you look in the RBR4 document, Schedule 1, they actually tell you what the maximum frequency bandwidths that are permitted for any type of emission in those frequency ranges. So I recommend that you become familiar with that schedule, because it will show you the frequency ranges that you'll be allowed and the maximum bandwidths. These mode bandwidths here are the ones that you will typically encounter. If you're operating your station in the way that most people operate their stations, CW will be 1 kilohertz, sideband will be 2.8 typically. AM will be 6 kilohertz, which happens to be the maximum bandwidth allowed in the HF bands. And FM is 15 kilohertz, which is the maximum bandwidth you can use in the FM bands for that that particular range. There are other sections where you get up into higher frequencies for other modes where the bandwidths are much wider, but these typical voice communications, CW, this is the range you're going to encounter. Slow scan TV, 140 hertz, 2.5 kilohertz, or 500 kilohertz. This is one of the examples. Fast scan TV can be as wide as 6 megahertz. Now, if you look at some of your band plans, you'll find out that some of these bands won't support 6 megahertz. So obviously, you're not going to run 6 megahertz in HF, because it's not even there in most of the bands. You don't have 6 megahertz. So it's going to be way up there. You know, probably around 400 megs is about the first chance you can get.
What's an example of slow scan TV?
Slow scan TV it's sort of a semi-digital format. Originally started off by just feeding an audio signal into the microphone input of a radio, kind of like a modem, and it would send a stream of data. That data would then be interpreted by the receiver, and it would create one line on the TV screen. Then the next line would come, then the next line, and the next line, and to fill an entire page with a still photo probably take about 5 minutes. It was very slow. Slow scan. Fast scan, a little faster.
But do they use that anymore? Slow scan.
People that like to play, old codgers and that, they probably do it just for fun.
Okay.
But these days, fast scan is the way to go. In other digital modes.
Thanks.
Yep. As I mentioned here, wideband communications can only be accommodated in frequency bands that are large enough to contain the emission. Privileges. Basic operators. They may access all amateur radio frequencies above 30 megahertz. No HF. They may only use commercially designed radio transmitters, designed for use within the amateur radio service. No modifications, no self-built equipment. No equipment that's been built by someone else, unless it's commercially manufactured. They may utilize a maximum RF output of 560 watts peak envelope power, which is what we measure sideband in, 190 watts carrier or other emission, and 250 watts DC input. What that means is they have different ways of explaining power. One method is to say that if you put 250 watts DC into an amplifier, it won't be possible to get anything more than these maximums. So they also say it that way because of efficiencies and so on. So basically an amplifier that has 250 watts DC input will not put out 1,000 watts no matter what you do. It won't do it. So they're covering it from two different directions. They may establish and maintain cross-band repeaters. Now that means that you can set up a repeater that transmits on one band and receives on the other. Okay. Now that could also mean HF if you have the plus. If not, you can't link HF to VHF. And we'll talk about that in a second. Basic with honors or 5 word per minute code may access all the frequencies below 30 megahertz. So if you get more than 80% or 80% or higher on this test, you will be given basic with honors. Or if you ever take the Morse code qualification, that will give you the same thing. Once you have that, then your crossband privileges will extend to being able to link HF and the higher frequencies, because you're allowed to be heard on those frequencies. Keep in mind also, because if you're a basic operator and you don't have HF privileges, you may not access a radio system that someone else has set up that puts your signal on HF. So can't do it. So basically your call sign should never be heard on a frequency or a mode that you're restricted from using, no matter how it gets there. The advanced operator may access all amateur radio frequencies. He may build, design, and modify and maintain radio amateur transmitter equipment. He may utilize a maximum RF power of 2,260 watts peak envelope power, 750 watts carrier, or 1,000 watts DC input. Again, is that DC? To get this kind of power, you need an amplifier with a 1,000 watts DC input power in the final. He may establish and maintain in-band repeaters, and he may remotely control fixed radio stations. And he can also sponsor club radio stations. So he can do everything that the basic can do, plus what I just read. So, how do you prepare for the test? You have a little section here, general recommendations. Commit the frequencies in Schedule 1 RBR4 to memory. Note those bands that are shared or have restrictions, such as power or bandwidth. There's a couple of them. Note section 6 and 7 of CPC 2-003. This is the antenna height exemptions. There will be some questions on that, so you should have an idea of what you can get away with without having to go through consultation and so on. Know how to convert meters to know what meters and frequency band, what's the relation. So you should know that if a certain frequency is this, it's in such and such meter band.
10 megahertz.
Megahertz.
30 meter band.
Yes. Yeah.
30 megahertz. 10 meter band.
Yeah. Generally, yes. That kind of thing, yes. Generally. There's
It's like
actual
20 or
numbers,
something like that.
in there, but yeah, that's generally what you'll see. That will help you both in a question that's direct or also when you're going to calculate lengths of antennas. Because the meters is the wavelength. And you know if you're going to calculate a half-wave dipole, you're going to create 2 sections, 1/4 wavelength long. So you're going to have to take your meters, so you have to divide it in half first, then divide it again to get the 2 sections. So if they ask you the total length of a half-wave dipole, then it's a half wave. If they ask you the length of one section, it's a 1/4 wave. And they'll try and trick you like that.
They do.
Oh yes. Review the policy questions in the question bank. Now this is where you will find regulations. They will be, if you were going to do a test online, if you went to section B 001-001 or B001002 or B001-003, those will only give you questions related to the regulations. That's how they're coded. So you can actually say, I want to be tested on this section of the 500 question bank, and all it'll give you is the questions for regulations. Each one has a number. Can't stress this enough. Read the question carefully and take note of, are they asking for not correct, is correct, true, or not true? Many people get caught by that. Note the frequency exposure limits for safety code 6, maximum and minimum effects, and what frequency range that occurs. One of you has a copy that I wrote something beside that. Who is it? You got it? What's it say?
Max 30 to 300 megahertz.
So from 30 megahertz to 300 megahertz is the most is the area that is most concerned.
Just so your body absorbs the most.
That's the one, yeah. That's the one and that will be on the test. If they ask a question like that, that's what they're looking for, 30 to 300.
300.
You might want to write that in.
I got a question of that.
Okay, I'll get to that in a second. I'm almost done here. Now, always remember that 3 of the answers provided on the test are usually nonsense. Try to pick the most correct. And the number 1 golden rule based on this whole document, if your answer conflicts with any of these key statements, it's likely to be incorrect. Your question?
I did a test and I got a question on the
Uh-huh.
safety code 6.
Okay, so we'll go over it when
That's what I
Okay.
trying to.
Okay. All right. Any questions in regards to what we just covered?
Why is it that we can't use secret codes, ciphers, and/or protocols?
This is to discourage criminals and individuals, enemies of the government, and so on, from fraternizing and using amateur communication for that. Also, people that might decide to run business or business-supported type communications, they hide the nature of their communications. This is why it's there.
And second question about the, like we're not allowed to broadcast on the ham radio bands, but that actually led me to a second question of what does it take to actually get your own like radio station? I mean,
Money.
Money wise,
well, I mean, not just money-wise. I mean,
Well-
yeah, it'll be expensive, obviously.
Not necessarily. Actually, you're talking to the right person because one of my hats is the regional broadcast representative for Northern Ontario. So basically, there are three avenues. There is the very low power FM. There is the low power FM and regular power. Regular power is big time money and hoops and all kinds of stuff, CRTC and the whole mess. Said that. Low power can be exempt, but it depends on the criteria and what you want to do your station with. In other words, if you're serving an area and it's going to be commercial, we're going to use commercial programming and stuff and commercials and things like that. And
did you mean, Travis? Sorry to interrupt. Did you mean just to get into radio and work an HF station, or were
No,
you
he's talking about broadcasting.
commercial-
I'm talking
Yeah.
like, I mean, yes, you could have it just and not run commercials and just be like some 24/7 music
Okay.
station, like, all right. But
Well, not exactly. I'm getting to that.
You need copyright
So
things.
what
Yes.
frequency are you
Okay,
gonna
sorry
pick?
to interrupt.
Somebody's got to lock you a frequency.
Well, that's right. That's why you have to apply. But I'm just saying, okay, now, supposing you are going to do, like, for instance, there are special exemptions from the CRTC requirements where things can be fast-tracked, like information radio stations that only broadcast information about the city, trails, weather conditions, and things like that on the trails and things like that, and just continuous loop stuff like that.
You see those on
They're called trail radios and info radios. They're exempt from CRTC. They can operate a maximum of 100 watts, and they can't play commercial content. They can't make
But
commercials
does
for
somebody
so-and-so
have to tell you
downtown.
which frequency to go on?
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, I
I'm just
mean,
saying these are the
you gotta
types of.
assign that,
Yes,
right?
but first of all, you have to determine what you're going to do with your station. Once you've determined that you're going to fall in a certain category, then you apply to our department for it, and you fill out a form. The form is available on the website, and you say, I want to establish and operate an FM broadcast station, and this is what I intend to do with it. And we look at it and say, okay, is it exempt from CRTC? Is it requires CRTC? If it requires CRTC, we say you have to send an application to the CRTC, copy us a copy of the acceptance letter, and then we will look at processing it. And until you do, we won't look at this application. If you are exempt, we will process it. We will assign you a radio frequency. But essentially, we ask you to look around and give us your first choice of what frequency you want. And then, because we don't pick frequencies, but we will correct wrong ones. in a nutshell. There are two documents to be familiar with. One is called RBR1 and RBR3. The other is the second one. That contains all the information you need to know about whether you could actually establish a broadcast station and be able to run it. Those are the two documents, RBR1, RBR3. They're available on the department's website under broadcasting. And they're the two main documents that you need to be familiar with. One is general rules for broadcasting, and the other one is specifically for FM broadcasting.
And what power are you allowed to use?
Maximum power for a low power FM is 50 watts at a height of 60 meters. Maximum.
So, what,
60 feet, sorry, 60 feet.
60 feet.
Yeah.
so approximately, like, what kind of broadcasting range would you
8
get?
kilometers,
8 kilometers?
typically for an LPFM.
That's not bad.
DLP is much less. They're under 10 watts. But you wouldn't get one in the city. They're only for outside of the city and remote areas. Mostly natives use those. It's a bit off topic, but there's your answer.
Question.
Answer the question.
Interesting question.
Okay, got a few more minutes here. Any questions to do with what we talked about? Rules and regulations. You understand how this the document's designed and how to use it? Because it's silly to sit and memorize all the rules and regulations. I've actually never done it myself, and I've been with the department for 25 years, and I know them. So I didn't. So because I have this in my head, and then I just look for this section that confirms it. Now, what I can do is show you the radio communication regulations and the section that deals with energy. Yes.
Yeah, I work a lot with radio modules that are in the 900 megahertz range.
Yes.
One situation I've run into though last year, I was taking the product that I built
Mm-hmm.
and was asked or given the go ahead to install it on St. Joe's Island.
Mm-hmm.
I lined probably near 10th sidewalk, Gilbertson's property.
Uh huh.
And he had forewarned me ahead of time that that is basically a radio wasteland. Handhelds don't work there. A lot of things don't work there. There's 4 towers nearby.
Oh yeah, well, there used to be 3. They must have added the third one. We used to call it the St. Joe Island Triangle.
Yeah, exactly. Because the radios that I put out there, I can in town I get approximately 1.3 miles distance between them, and they still function well. But there, for that same 1.3 mile, I had to have 4 radios with the Aggie antennas
Mm-hmm.
to clear that same distance in that area.
Yeah, your receivers are getting overloaded.
Is that what's happening?
Yes.
So I called Quattro and they did a search for me to find out who's on that tower, what frequencies they're using, the power they're using, and everything else. And for the life of me, if it's all legit and legal, I couldn't understand how they're allowed to basically cause other signals in the 900 meg range, which is the public range.
Because they're licensed and you're not. You don't get any protection. Otherwise, we'd assign you a frequency that wouldn't get bothered.
I believe that is under number 21 there.
Yeah.
I just not, well, I guess the part I had a hard time understanding is if they're in a range that they're paying for,
Mm-hmm.
how would that be interfering with 900 megs?
Harmonics.
Yeah, okay.
Or they might be another system up there. Also, there's some unprotected frequencies that are used by internet providers and stuff.
Right.
And they're allowed to set them up on a no interference, no protection basis. So as long as they don't cause interference to other systems, they stay within the power limitations. There's a whole document on it.
Okay.
They're allowed to do that. But if you come in and want to use the same frequencies, so sad, too bad. No protection. Got to go to a different band. One of these will have to move. But there are bands that they can get licensed and they are protected. That's part of licensing. When you're licensed, you're protected. When you're unlicensed, you're not protected. Amateurs are really lucky. They're not protected, but they have enough frequencies to move around on that they kind of are in some ways. Okay, I want to show you this just for your own, you'll know what I'm talking about here. Take this thing up here. Come on, wiki wiki. Been asleep too long. Huh. I'm not seeing the click. Come on. Click. There we go. Okay. Regulations. RBR4 is it R2? No, that's the Radio Communication Act. Remember I told you the Radio Communication Act is the minister's authority to be the minister? Well, this is the one here. And we just get rid of the gibberish here and get on to the... Okay. There we go. Okay. So you see the sections here. We have our short title, our applications, prohibitions, and so on. This all covers offenses and punishment. This is all dealing with his authority to make rules and the maximum penalties that he can impose. And that's your Radio Communication Act, which is the final authority. The next document I was referred to was the Radio Communication Regulations. And just get rid of the chicken scratch here. Here we go. Okay. So I mentioned that there was a section specifically for the amateur. I believe it was section 42. I'm going by memory. Yes, it is too. Right there. Operations in the amateur radio service. This specifically talks about some of the privileges and restrictions that are specific to the amateur radio service. So you'll find that's where you'll find most of your rules. In addition to this, there is the document RBR4, regulation by rules by regulation. Regulation by reference. That's what it is, RBR4. And this contains a little bit more information about the policies. They're pretty close to rules. We treat them like rules, but they are kind of policies. They're not locked in with RBR. They probably will be in the next one. They'll probably move this and put it all in. No, this one actually is incorporated. These are rules. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. These are all enforceable because they're linked right to the radio communication regulations. It states that they are right in the document. And this covers your different things. The schedule I was referring to, the one you need to be familiar with, is this guy right here. Schedule 1. You need to know what these are, roughly what frequency ranges these are. And it's also a good idea to know, it doesn't tell you what meters they are, but you should, in your mind, have a good idea what they are. So it's going to ask you to do calculations or ask you general questions. And you'll notice the bandwidths. So very, very low in this band because it's a very small band, only 100 hertz. You've got 6 kilohertz typically for all of your HF bands. This particular band is an interesting one. This is a new one. This is the 30 meter band. There are actually 5 discrete frequencies, and there's specific protocols that you're allowed to use, and that's it. So it's maximum 2.8, which is single sidebands. You can't do AM on this band, or FM, or any of that stuff. It's just not going to fit. And the frequency centers, the frequency has to be centered right on that frequency. It's much more straight. You've got specific frequencies, almost like crystals, that you can use, and you can't go on either side of it. It's a new band. They give him access to play with.
Why again was the 30 meter band just one kilohertz?
30 meters.
It was 1 kilohertz, right? 10
No, it's not 1 kilohertz. 30 meters is where is that now? 30 meters. Is it 18?
10.1 and number 10
Yeah.
Okay, this
on
one
the
here.
list there.
So it's
That's
1
30.
kilohertz.
Okay, that's 30 meter band.
That's what I said, 30 meter band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one.
And why is that? Why is it that narrow? Like what? Do you remember?
Because it is. You only got 10.1 to 10.15. You only got 50 kilohertz to work with.
I don't understand. You say
The band, we only give this much of the band to use.
I know, but like, what would be the reason for that? Is there other people using
Yeah.
it in that area?
Mhm.
Other people.
That's
are
what it
using
is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's being
So
used.
okay.
We just got a sliver to play with.
50. So it's only 50 megahertz wide.
Yeah, the whole band.
Huh.
Kilohertz, actually.
Oh. Yeah. 50
Kilohertz, 1 kilohertz.
50
Half a
kilohertz
kilohertz.
wide.
It's 1 kilohertz.
And each.
The band was 1 kilohertz, so
Yeah.
50 channels there.
Yeah.
Whole 50
Five-
channels.
Yeah, 1 kilohertz
500
each, only for
hertz
CW.
wide, right?
Only
Half a
CW.
kilohertz each
Yeah.
side, right?
Very, very tight. But up here, you see, this is where you could use your slow scan, your fast scan TV. You can do actually up to 12 megahertz bandwidths because it's much bigger bands. But it wouldn't work down here. So this is a good document to be familiar with. And this is the RBR4. The last document that comes up is the RIC3. It will probably be incorporated. This is the one that's more policies. And it has some more general information. But it's not locked to the regs yet. But we still treat it as a pretty well policy. We'll take a break.
CPC, what is it, CP2?
2-03.
Radio Communications and Broadcast Antenna System.
Correct.
That's another one, right?
Yeah, that's the one that's specifically for radio.